Deep in the woods, hidden by time and twisted trees, stood Echo House. Locals whispered tales. Tales of tragedy, tales of terror. The house had stood for over a century, its walls soaked in the memories of those who had lived and died within. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind through the broken windows seemed to tell a story of its own. Tales of souls trapped, forever echoing. The villagers spoke of ghostly apparitions seen in the dead of night, shadows that moved with a life of their own. They said that on certain nights, if you listened closely, you could hear the faint sound of crying as if the house itself was mourning the lives it had claimed. The house was a relic of grandeur, now decaying. Once it had been the pride of the town, a symbol of wealth and status. But time had not been kind to Echo House. The grand chandeliers were now nothing but rusted metal and broken glass. The elegant wallpaper had peeled away, revealing the bare, rotting wood beneath. Its once bright windows were clouded eyes, staring blankly. They seemed to follow you as you walked past, as if the house itself was watching, waiting. The windows, now covered in grime and dust, gave the house a lifeless, haunted look. It was as if the soul of the house had long departed, leaving behind only a shell of its former self. Vines, like skeletal fingers, clawed at the crumbling walls. Nature had begun to reclaim what was once hers. The garden, once meticulously maintained, was now a wild, tangled mess. The vines crept up the walls, their tendrils reaching into every crack and crevice, as if trying to pull the house down into the earth. Echo House promised only despair. It was a place where dreams went to die, where hope was a distant memory. The air around the house was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if the very ground it stood on was cursed. Those who dared to enter often spoke of an overwhelming feeling of sadness, a weight that pressed down on their very souls. It was a place where happiness died, and fear thrived. The laughter of children had long been replaced by the howling of the wind. The warmth of family gatherings had given way to the cold, empty silence of abandonment. Fear was the only constant, a living, breathing entity that seemed to inhabit every corner of the house. Some said the house was cursed. They believed that the tragedies that had befallen its inhabitants were no mere coincidences. There were stories of sudden illnesses, mysterious accidents, and untimely deaths. The house seemed to have a dark power, a malevolent force that brought misfortune to all who came near. Others, that it was a gateway, a portal to another world, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. They spoke of strange lights seen in the windows of doors that opened and closed on their own. Some even claimed to have seen figures standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. All agreed, some places are best left undisturbed. Echo House was one such place, a monument to the past, a reminder of the fragility of life. It stood as a warning to all who saw it. Some secrets are best left buried, some doors best left unopened. For within its walls lay a darkness that no light could ever hope to dispel. A group of friends, thrill-seekers all, heard the stories. They laughed, they scoffed. They were drawn to the darkness, yearning for a taste of the unknown.
Led by the reckless Jake and the skeptical Emily, they arrived at the house. Their excitement was palpable, a tangible thing in the stillness of the woods.
They joked, their laughter echoing in the silence. But the woods held their breath, waiting.
The front door creaked open, an invitation into the abyss. They crossed the threshold, unaware of the horrors that awaited.
Dust lay thick on everything. Cobwebs clung to the decaying grandeur. Each footstep echoed, a drumbeat of apprehension in the suffocating silence. They explored, their initial bravado fading with each passing room. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of unseen eyes.
A sudden cold breeze whispered through the hall, stirring dust and memories. A child's laughter echoed, chilling them to the bone.
Then, silence. The house held its breath, watching, waiting. They found a nursery. A rocking horse swayed gently, moved by an unseen hand. A lullaby, faint and mournful, seemed to emanate from the crib.
Emily saw a figure in the shadows, a woman, her face etched with sorrow, cradling an empty space in her arms. Then she was gone.
They felt a presence, cold, mournful, filled with an unspeakable sadness.
The house was alive, its memories tangled with the living. Fear, primal and instinctive, began to take root. They were not alone.
Behind this bookcase, there's a hidden room.
Look, there's a diary here. It's open. The ink is so frantic and faded.
It talks about a family, trapped by some malevolent entity.
Sacrifices made, souls claimed. This house, it's feeding on their despair.
As they read, the house seemed to groan around them. The shadows deepened, pressing in, hungry.
This house, it's more than just a house.
It's a prison, its bars woven from fear and despair.
Panic started to rise. They had to leave. The air was thick with tension, every breath a struggle. Shadows danced on the walls, mocking their fear. The group huddled together, their eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. The walls seemed to close in on them, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside sent shivers down their spines. They knew they had to move, but fear rooted them to the spot. But the house had other plans. It was as if the very structure was alive, feeding off their terror. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the air thick with an unseen presence. The house was a labyrinth of horrors, each turn leading them deeper into its clutches. The group could feel the house watching them, its unseen eyes tracking their every move. It was a predator, and they were its prey.
We need to get out of here. Now! The urgency in their voices was palpable, a desperate plea for escape. They moved as one, a frantic mass of bodies pushing and shoving, each person driven by the primal instinct to survive. The darkness seemed to thicken around them, the air growing colder with each passing second. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, the sound of their pounding hearts echoing in the oppressive silence.
Doors slammed shut, locking them in. The sound was deafening, a final resounding note of doom. They rushed to the doors, pounding on the wood with their fists, but it was no use. The house had sealed them in, its grip tightening with every passing moment. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were trapped. Windows refused to budge, their glass like ice. They were trapped. The cold seeped into their bones, a chilling reminder of their dire situation. They tried to break the glass, but it was as if the windows were made of steel. The house was a fortress, impenetrable and unyielding. Desperation set in, their minds racing for a solution, but finding none.
Why won't they open? We're trapped. The frustration in their voices was evident, a mix of anger and fear. They pulled and pushed at the doors, their hands growing numb from the effort. The house seemed to mock their attempts, its silence a cruel reminder of their helplessness. They were prisoners in a place that defied logic, a nightmare from which there was no waking.
Keep trying, we can't give up. The determination in their voices was a flicker of hope in the darkness. They threw their weight against the doors, their muscles straining with the effort. But the house was unyielding, its grip on them unbreakable. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing down like a physical weight. They knew they had to keep trying, but with each failed attempt their hope dwindled.
Whispers followed them, cold and menacing. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a chilling reminder of the house's malevolent presence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their minds with dread. They could feel the eyes of the house upon them, watching, waiting. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper, as the house tightened its grip. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. A dense fog seemed to fill the room, choking them with its oppressive weight. They gasped for air, their lungs burning with the effort. The fog was like a living thing, wrapping around them, squeezing the life from their bodies. They stumbled through the darkness, their vision blurred, their minds clouded with fear.
Whispering, "You can't leave. You belong to us now." The voice was a sinister whisper, a chilling promise of their fate. The words echoed in their minds, a haunting reminder of their captivity. They could feel the presence of the house all around them, its grip tightening with every passing moment. The realization was a cold, hard truth. They were never leaving.
The house was toying with them, savoring their fear. It was a predator, and they, its prey. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent shivers down their spines. They knew they had to move, but fear rooted them to the spot. The house was alive, feeding off their terror, and it wasn't going to let them go. It was a predator, and they, its prey. The house was a living, breathing entity, a malevolent force that thrived on their fear. They could feel its eyes upon them, watching, waiting. The darkness was its ally, the cold its weapon. They were trapped in a nightmare, a place where fear reigned supreme and there was no escape. They huddled together, their breaths shallow and quick, eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the old house sending shivers down their spines. Their fear a tangible thing, almost visible in the cold air, like a mist that clung to their skin. It was as if the very walls of the house were closing in on them, feeding off their terror. The diary had spoken of a ritual, a binding of souls. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and eerie illustrations that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The words described a dark ceremony, one that required the fear and despair of its participants. The house fed on their fear, their despair. It was a living entity, a dark presence that thrived on the negative emotions of those trapped within its walls. The more they feared, the stronger it became, drawing them deeper into its sinister embrace.
The diary, it mentioned a ritual, a way to bind souls to the house, to trap them in an endless cycle of fear and torment. The words seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if the book itself was alive. We're part of it now. There's no turning back. The ritual has already begun, and we are its unwilling participants. The house has claimed us, and it will not let us go.
The echoes of the past swirled around them, ghostly apparitions that seemed to be caught in a loop, reliving their final moments over and over again. The air was thick with the weight of their sorrow and pain. They saw glimpses, a family torn apart, their faces twisted in anguish. The photographs scattered on the floor told a story of love and loss, of a family that had once been happy but was now forever trapped in the house's malevolent grip. Their screams echoing through the years, a haunting chorus that never ceased. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, a constant reminder of the house's dark history and the souls it had claimed. The house was a vortex, a swirling maelstrom of darkness and despair. It pulled them down into its depths, a never-ending spiral that seemed to have no bottom. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank, pulling them down into its darkness. There was no escape. The floor felt like quicksand beneath their feet, dragging them further into the house's sinister embrace. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into the abyss.
You are not the first, and you will not be the last. The house has claimed many before you, and it will continue to do so. It is a prison of echoes, a place where the past and present collide in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. And you will not be the last. The house will continue to feed, to grow stronger with each soul it claims. It is an insatiable beast, a dark presence that will never be satisfied.
They were not the first victims. The house had a long history, a dark past filled with countless souls who had fallen into its trap. Each one added to the chorus of echoes, their voices joining the haunting symphony that filled the air. And they wouldn't be the last. The house would continue to claim more victims, to feed on their fear and despair. It was a never-ending cycle, a prison of echoes that would never be broken. They ran through the halls, desperate, lost. The house seemed to shift around them, a labyrinth with no exit. They found themselves back in the nursery.
No, not here again. We have to find a way out.
The rocking horse now rocked violently, its rhythm frantic, desperate. The lullaby reached a crescendo filled with an unbearable sorrow. The woman in the shadows turned, her eyes filled with a hollow grief.
Whispering, "Stay with us, forever."
Then silence. They were trapped. The house had claimed them. The house stands silent once more, its secrets kept safe. The echoes of the past whisper through its halls, waiting for the next victims.
Whispering, "We are waiting."
For Echo House always claims its due. It feeds on fear, on despair, on the souls brave enough or foolish enough to enter its domain. The cycle continues, unending.
Whispering, beware the whispers, beware the echoes, beware Echo House.